AI isn't just a tool, it's a cultural force, and despite technological advancements in AI, a constant remains, and that is the human. Now, this talk is about those humans and the cultures they inhabit. So, today I'm going to take you back into the 1980s when the research in this book was being conducted. This is Diana E. Forsyth, an anthropologist who, for about 8 years during the 80s and 90s, was a fly on the wall in 4 US labs observing AI research in action. Now, these labs specialized in creating medical AI tools like building systems to help migraine sufferers cope with their symptoms. The question will be, has much changed about the way we design our AI systems 40 years later? This is what we're going to explore through the lens of Diane. So, Diana E. Forsyth exposed the power dynamics at play in these labs, and she gave us insights around the perception of what tech work is. Now, this talk isn't a historical curio, but it's going to be a warning that if we don't change the way we build this technology soon, we may be doomed to make the same mistakes that our grandparents of AI did. So together today, I hope we can cover the key lessons for building a more inclusive, more responsible AI. A little note about anthropology, just in case you're not familiar with it. It's not what Ross did from Friends. He's a paleontologist. And it's not what Indiana Jones did. He's an archaeologist, and a pretty dubious one at that. Hey, Indy, I hear the British Museum is still hiring. Now, anthropology is the study of human experience. So that's culture and community, including all the work and tools that we use. And then when you add text into the mix, this is called digital anthropology or techno-anthropology. So digital anthropology is the study of how we use and live with technology from a cultural perspective. Now, most of the work is done when conducting anthropology is things like field work, so observing and interacting with the people to get a better understanding of a person or a group. And this is what Diana did. So she would come into these AI labs and she would observe them and interview with them while they worked. Oh, and if you can't cope with not listening to an AI talk about a picture of the Terminator, I present you with an alternative. Lady Terminator, a 1980s Indonesian film where the main character starts off as an anthropologist before turning into the Terminator. It's a fantastic film. Highly recommend it. It's absolutely crazy.
Come on. In this day and age, you speak of legends? I'm an anthropologist, huh? Come on. In this
So
day
I
and age,
guess
you
if
speak of
my
legends?
AI
I'm
anthropologist
an
doesn't work
anthropologist,
out, at least I know I've
Come
got
on.
options.
In this day and age, you speak of legends?
Anyways,
I'm an
digression
anthropologist,
over. As Diana's research developed through those 8 years in the lab, she became increasingly concerned about the power dynamics influencing the end product of that AI, namely that there was a lot of voices missing from the creation of it. So she explained that in conducting anthropological research in these labs, she was exposing key absent voices, and she described this as speaking truth to power. It wasn't always well received, this speaking truth to power, however. So while her work earned her lots of accolades from her fellow anthropologists and people working in academia, it ruffled a lot of feathers amongst the AI researchers that she was observing in the lab. As we'll see, perhaps if they paid a bit more attention to the observations she was making, maybe we'd have better AI capabilities. Now, from one anthropologist to another, I'm Lianne Potter. I'm your time-traveling guide here to connect Diana's work with the work we're doing today in AI creation. Aside from being an anthropologist, I've also worked in tech for the last 10 years, first as a software developer, and then pivoted into cybersecurity, and I'm now currently doing an MSc in AI and data science. So Diana was once told that those who can't code shouldn't be in the lab. Unfortunately, I think many people in tech still feel that way today. But the danger is, as soon as you exclude, you delete the social. But what does it mean to delete the social? Humans are intricate beings. We're all layered with history and culture. We belong to multiple communities. There's the family communities, our friendship groups, our local and national groups, and of course, work. Going to work is a community and a cultural event. So whenever we interact with anything or anyone, we carry all this cultural tapestry around with us. And sometimes our cultural experiences align, and sometimes they clash. And this also influences how we engage with technology. So to delete the social is to remove what makes us human. And those creating the tools that are part of the social fabric too, they have a significant impact on this, even if sometimes they don't see it. So Diana explored how the researchers' own assumptions were woven into the tools they created. When she asked them how they viewed their work, their answers were often very telling. There was doing AI and not doing AI. So to them, this was doing AI, which was writing code, problem solving, building systems. But get an anthropologist to observe for a while, then you're presented with this picture. So this, in order, is what the AI researchers actually did all day. Give you a moment to look through that. So you can see they're like lab meetings, research seminars, more meetings. It looks like my diary at work. Going to conferences, and then on the other side in the black background, teaching courses, taking courses, writing papers, doing admin. This is what they actually did all day. And as you can see, they were pretty selective with what they called work, because right at the very bottom, even though they themselves prioritize this as what they mainly do, the thing they did least was writing code, building systems, and solving problems. So all the social elements of work were neglected. The meetings, the engaging with other people, they didn't see that as doing real work. So what does this omission mean for the social elements, for the systems they built? Now, typically when you don't value something, like being social, then you don't put any effort into it, or you can be really bad at it. There was no good for the very, and this is like no good for the very social tools that these technologies will bring, because these researchers became often very shy and introverted. And describing an interaction, she said one expert even said they have dreadful communication skills, and that their technical skills far exceed their need to be social. In my experience, and probably in yours too, we've all met technologists who prefer tech over people, but can you really succeed in delivering good tech without good communication? Now, Diana's insight suggests that better communication could have prevented a lot of shelfware, and we'll go into more of that later. So if these AI researchers didn't see meetings as work, then what actually was work? It was hard science and seeking universal truths. So anything outside the scientific method wasn't valid for AI, because they were building quantifiable, codifiable, testable systems, believing only technical solutions could solve problems. Coding and building were the only legitimate AI work in their eyes, with one researcher going so far to suggest that AI research is something that you do sitting alone in front of the computer for hours on end. So as I say, anything outside that was considered pseudo work. So meetings and discussions, for example. Disciplines like anthropology, psychology, philosophy were all dismissed as soft science or even unscientific, with no place in the lab's AI development. With this mindset, that made Diana, an anthropologist, work very challenging. Despite being a highly educated doctor herself, her work was seen as lesser. One lab member even described her as a dictaphone with legs. It wasn't easy being an anthropologist in a technical space, and from my experience, it still isn't. So how does viewing their work as a purely logical and scientific endeavor delete the social? It's twofold. They fail to recognize that their work is inherently social, and it takes place in a highly social setting, which is the institution. Their worldview is decontextualized and idealized. They only see their work for the aspects they enjoy most, an ideal, not the reality. Now, we all do this to an extent, but this was skewing their worldview and in turn influenced the products they were building, because their approach erased the nuances of the human experience, which is crucial for creating meaningful AI systems, which are supposed to replicate the human experience. So the question is, if they don't value the social elements of their own work, what's stopping them from erasing the social aspects of other people's work? Turns out not much, and that's exactly what happened. Now, this brings up to the section on power dynamics. Now, the researchers were mostly male, white, and from privileged backgrounds. In the 1980s and 90s, they were known as knowledge engineers, and their aim was to duplicate human expertise. They saw knowledge as something to extract, like a mineral or a diseased tooth, and make that machine readable. But how did this knowledge acquisition work? Without today's massive amounts of data, these researchers relied on very manual data extraction, which often was delivered through face-to-face interviews. So these sessions, these interviews, would last for about 1 or 2 hours, occurring once or twice a fortnight, and they typically involved a single expert coming in, so maybe a heart surgeon, for example, which was often another white man in power, whose expertise was then taken at face value. They relied on one specialist to reflect the knowledge base of the entire topic. So back to that heart surgeon example, getting a heart surgeon to tell you everything they know about heart attacks and building a system from there. As you can imagine, this opens up the potential for knowledge gaps, but also a lot of bias. Researchers treated knowledge as something that could be easily accessible with direct questions. They weren't interested in what really happened during heart surgery. They wanted to know what heart surgery was by the book. Now, Diana observed that even the warmest of personalities would adopt a really cold style during this knowledge elicitation or interviews. And she would ask them, why was empathy switched off when you're interviewing people? And one researcher replied, it just seems like we're doing a technical task. There isn't room for empathy. The knowledge gathering process for them was transactional. It wasn't collaborative. It was medical questionnaire. It was really task orientated, treating the expert as a brain to be mined, not really to be engaged. As I said, they weren't often very good at interviewing, and some of the experts that came in to give their expertise often felt mistreated. This is a direct quote of someone saying that they felt like they'd been treated like a dog during the interview process. Using cold methods to gather data from people was ineffective. The engineers blamed the experts when they didn't get the desired knowledge as well, and they failed to recognize that a lot of knowledge isn't universal or rule-bound like coding. Humans aren't stable entities to be codified in absolutes. We're just not. And today, much of the data is scraped from the internet and it's sorted by others, and we know how reliable online information can be. And then obviously we have to make a judgment. If you've seen the thumbs up, are you happy with that response or not? It's very easy to train a model with reinforcement learning to also give really rubbish answers, because the whole process of getting a good response out of AI or a suitable response is incredibly subjective. Who am I to say that that what I've heard about or given information about heart surgery is good enough or not good enough to go into the system, for example? Who am I to click yes, well done, Gemini, can you make sure you keep doing this? And then that influences everyone else's experience. These activities and the ones Diana observes are a fall, again, of deleting the social, because it's making judgment calls about whose knowledge counts, creating a significant power dynamic. A small group deciding what's important for others to know is a form of power. And these knowledge engineers were very aware of that power, but their end users were not. So the doctor down the line who was supposed to be using these AI tools didn't know that this whole software, this AI software, was based on just a handful of sources. And really, that was best endeavors, a handful of sources. Usually it was one person or one textbook. The knowledge engineer's power was invisible to the end user, and that is just like it is today with black box models. Imagine building a medical diagnosis tool today that's based on that kind of data set and that lack of transparency. But maybe we're not too far off. We might have a lot more data points, but as the old adage goes, shit in, shit out. We don't always know if these models we're interacting with today are deleting the social until there's a scandal, like the Amazon recruiting tool, or many other cases. Now, I think power is at its most insidious when you can't see it or challenge it, or when we're given a false sense of security that it's working in our best interests. The knowledge engineers that Diana worked with viewed knowledge in absolutes. They were very comfortable with sweeping the perspective of others under the AI rug. Not only that, actual end users, clinicians who would eventually be using these tools day in, day out, were not a part of the data collection process. Nurses, for example, were not considered value expert sources for medical informatics, according to these researchers had absolute power in delineating who counted in the build process. And spoiler alert, It usually looked like them, came from the same schools and backgrounds they did. So in doing so, they erased various cultures, races, classes, and genders, to name a few. Muting these voices caused both ethical and practical issues, introducing challenges we're still contending with as we build AI today. They didn't see their power as a problem, however. The issue was a problem with user acceptance. After the 1970s AI winter, labs were thriving with funding and possibilities, building medical AI for clinicians and patients with really few constraints. And it sounds perfect, but it's not quite, because when you have no constraints, you have no guardrails. You don't have to adhere to any guidelines. And when you don't have any guardrails or guidelines, you don't care about what you build, because if the money's going to come in anyways, in your head, it's all one step towards scientific mastery, right? Just keep breaking things if the money's going to keep flowing. One of these things will land. The consequence of blue sky building was that they didn't care if the end users liked their products or thought they were really useful, because at the end of the day, their main goal was that they were doing AI. As a result, nearly everything that Diana witnessed in these labs that these researchers built ended up completely untouched. AI automation promises today, as it did back then, quicker diagnoses, lower costs, but nobody wanted to use these tools. So when Diana asked about this, why is all the tech that, this AI tech that they've been building not being used? Where is it? She was told it's all on the shelf. They had literally built shelfware. They were also looking in the wrong place for answers to why this kept happening, or as Diana said, they genuinely were baffled by him. She pointed out, but if the physicians need these systems so much, why aren't they using them? Now, the problem is that these systems just weren't seen as useful. Either the researchers weren't building the right systems or not building the systems right. So Diana spent a lot of time trying to figure out why. She found that instead of examining their own mistakes, the AI researchers blamed the user. They would call them things like naive or computer phobic. It was an end user problem, not a problem with the tool itself. So they believed. Because they believed that these systems work fine if you just know how to use them. Diana pointed out to them, however, that instead of blaming users, maybe they should realize the problem is with the systems themselves, not the people trying to use it. That suggestion was dismissed. So Diana observed that the researchers blamed user acceptance instead of recognizing the unusable systems. And this was because of how they perceived success and what success was, because success for them wasn't tied to real-life usefulness. One scientist even claimed that usefulness is not quantifiable. So seeking feedback from users was rare, and the users weren't observed using the systems. What do you have then? You have a system that's going to remain on the shelf. Now, if you recall, I said earlier that work is a social aspect. It's a cultural social event. It really is, and it's very nuanced. So yes, a doctor may do heart surgery, but there is more to their job than just doing heart surgery. They have meetings, they have consultations, they see patients, they update records. None of this stuff was any of interest to these researchers, however, despite the very activities creating barriers to making this actually a successful piece of software. Now, you speak to a clinician today, they don't want to be bogged down with steps in an IT process. They want to help patients. This is a disconnect between AI designers and real-world users, deleting the social realities of work. Remember, data gathered was often a clinical engagement, pun intended, between experts. Remember that medical questionnaire? And they rarely set foot in clinical settings. One time I read in the book, she asked a designer of one of these AI systems and said, have you actually visited a hospital site? because they were building something for this site. And she said, have you been to go see them? And the researcher in astonishment said, oh no, I can't stand the sight of blood. So the clinicians' real job processes weren't part of the design either, and AI teams rarely observe real-life problems. The AI tools that were built on engineers' knowledge or a single user expert's input, not specific data on the individuals who will actually be using the systems and facing these problems. Remember, humans aren't like computer programs. But neither is work. Like, think about if you were to describe your day job, you'd miss so many steps. Would you be able to remember that most of your day is meetings? If you're a coder now or someone working in AI, do you say that you do more coding than going to meetings, doing admin, little things like that? Now, remember, the AI researchers in this case, the ones that Diana was observing during the 80s and 90s, they can't even grasp the realities of their own day jobs. So how are they going to imagine someone else's that they'd not even seen? Now, work, as we all know, doesn't follow official procedures. I'm sure HR would love them to, but they don't. And these systems miss the tactic knowledge and life's workarounds, and they lack accommodation for real-life complexities. And as a result, knowledge falls off a cliff, which is a term that the AI researchers used when their systems hit limits and faced unanticipated situations. For example, one system suggests that a male patient had an infection or post-amnionitis. That can only occur in pregnant women. So they forgot to code in that men don't get pregnant. So Diana's conclusion was that these engineers could choose what goes into the knowledge base, but focused on an ideal scenario, and this made their systems fragile. Just like they only focused on the ideal aspects of their own work, they didn't recognize that humans are not typical. And as such, systems need to be designed knowing that people will deviate from the ideal, will deviate from the script, will deviate from the happy path. Doing AI in the end really meant that this powerful group was able to delete the social and as a result, limit this tool's potential. But what else were they deleting? Now, the labs that Diana researched weren't just made up of men. In the 1980s and 90s, women made up 8% of the academic computer science profession in America. Today, it's 15%. Go progress. Women in the lab were often treated as other in this male-dominated field. And I experienced something very similar on a podcast recently where they introduced me as Lianne Potter, female cybersecurity expert. To which I responded, do you refer to your male guests that way? They quickly changed that introduction. Now, Diana observed that women in these labs were seen as second-class citizens and faced teasing and sexual harassment. In one instance, a file was placed on a female worker's desktop that played the orgasm scene from When Harry Met Sally on a loop and could not be stopped. When Diana asked the woman about it, how she felt, she just said, it's just male territory. When Diana highlighted this gender divide, male lab workers often denied it or dismissed their female colleagues as being overly sensitive. After all, these scientists believed that science was objective and culture-free, arguing that science is gender neutral. Ergo, because they're scientists, they obviously can't be sexist. Yeah, surely we've made some progress in recognizing women as significant contributors to tech and the AI space. Here is a snippet that really hit home from the book. And this is Diana commenting on gender initiatives at the time. So this is probably early 90s. So she says, public efforts to increase the proportion of women in computer science is often treated as a pipeline issue. The idea is that encouraging more girls and young women to study science will solve the problem. However, this overlooks the fact that there are already women in this field who face unequal treatment. Pipeline problem. Getting girls into tech and why women are leaving tech is the culture. How is this an issue still after 40 years? I would argue it's more than disappointing, actually dangerous. Nothing much has changed, and with AI technology moving so fast, we don't have the luxury of another 40 years to get this right, so we need to act now. Now, Diana, the anthropologist, tragically passed away in 1997 during a hiking accident, and I feel like we are definitely poorer for not seeing her work continued in today's AI landscape. I'm sure she would have so much to say on that. We need anthropologists to help AI researchers who focus solely on theoretical data. By immersing themselves in AI development, anthropologists can provide crucial insights into the social, cultural, and ethical dimensions of AI. This bridges the gap between the technical aspects and human experiences and preventing harm, because an outsider's perspective is always valuable. Diana said this about her work. As an outside observer, I have a different perspective on the source of this problem. Medical information systems are not being accepted because they do not meet the needs of the consumers, and that the difficulty in turn results in the way that in which the problem formulation, system design, system building, and evaluation are understood and carried out in medical informatics. What I take away as an anthropologist from Diana's work is that the main problem of user acceptance was that those creating the AI systems valued the technology and its potential more than the humans using it. Let's not keep making that mistake, because we stand at a crossroads. We should learn from the AI pioneers of the 80s and 90s and embrace this exciting AI landscape with the human in mind. Otherwise, risk not only AI harms and poor alignment, but also a lot of shelfware. Now, I'm hoping in sharing her insights with you today that you'd be tempted to pick up a copy of this book. This book is called Studying Those Who Study Us. I was lucky enough to start this project with the blessing of Diana's widow, who has been a great source of support and insight. And this is a picture of me and him. He came to both see this talk being presented for the first time. And to prove that it's a really small world after all, I was posting about the work I was doing a deep dive into Diana's research, and her niece got in touch with me. She's a software developer, and she's also doing an AI safety course at the moment. So it's great to see that AI family tradition continuing. So I had a call with Diana's niece, and she was reading Diana's book at the time. And I said, what in Diana's research really resonates with her as a person working in tech, but also someone who's witnessing this new AI revolution. And what she said was that the hypocrisy is that a mostly male tech elite are the ones telling us how dangerous AI is, but they're also the ones in control. The real danger then, and is now, isn't AI itself, but that the people who have the power to build it have great power indeed. Diana said her work was about speaking truth to power. Now it's your turn. Go build better AI. Thank you very much.